On Friday, September 12, 2014, the sun rose over the Australian village of Kendall at 5:52 a.m. William Tyrrell, a 3-year-old boy, slept through the dawn by just an hour. "Daddy?" William rolled over in bed and tried to reach the floor with his little feet. It was only 6 degrees outside, but the child was sleeping in a light pajama set. "Daddy, can we watch Fireman Sam?" Yes, of course, the answer was yes. And so began the final hours of William's life. He sat up in bed and watched the cartoon on an iPhone. He pulled toys from the cupboard and dressed himself in his Spider-Man costume. William had toast and cereal for breakfast, then ran outside to play in the garden with his sister, and then he vanished. On September 11, 2014, William, his sister Lindsay, and their parents arrived in Kendall to visit the children's grandmother. Kendall is a small village in New South Wales, located about a 4-hour drive from Sydney, with a population of around 1,141. It has no access to the sea or ocean and is surrounded by dense forest. The family arrived quite late in the evening, and soon everyone went to bed. On the morning of September 12th, William's father got into the car and drove off in search of a place with better internet reception. He needed to make a business call. Around the same time, William's mother stepped out onto the veranda from where she could see part of the street and noticed something strange. 2 old cars parked unusually close together on the opposite side of the road. One was white with faded paint, the other was steel gray. "That's odd," she thought. No one ever parked on the road here. It was a quiet street, and all the houses had long driveways. Visitors always parked in the driveways, otherwise they'd have to walk quite a way to the front door. But the woman soon forgot about the cars and joined the rest of the family outside. The morning was still quite chilly, so she happily joined in the children's active games. They were joyfully running around the yard when suddenly Lindsay stopped in the middle of the driveway and, looking toward the road, asked whose car that was. William's mother also noticed a dark green-gray sedan slowly passing by. The car drove toward a neighbor's house and began turning around at the end of the cul-de-sac. Probably the neighbor, she assumed. But as was later discovered, it wasn't the neighbor. The house next door belonged to a family who were away visiting their son in Queensland. Sometime later, the women sat in the sun drinking tea, keeping an eye on William and Lindsay. The children were playing hide-and-seek in the large yard surrounding the house. Around 10:30, William's mother went inside to make more tea. The last thing she remembers before William disappeared was him growling like a tiger before running around the corner of the house to hide. The women were still chatting on the veranda when they noticed something strange, an eerie silence. They estimate that about 5 minutes had passed. They immediately began searching for the boy. William's father soon returned and joined the search. The parents called his name in the street and knocked on neighbors' doors. At 10:56 a.m., they called 000 to report their missing child. No one heard a car door slam, no screeching tires. William didn't scream, he was there, and then suddenly he wasn't. So what happened? There is a methodological principle known as Occam's razor. In essence, it says that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Or, as Dr. Theodore Woodward once put it, when you hear hoofbeats, think of horses, not zebras. The simplest explanation in those first few hours was that William had simply wandered off. He was playing outside. He didn't live in Kendall. The yard where he'd been playing was surrounded by the thick woods of Kendall State Forest. Maybe he chased a butterfly and couldn't find his way back. That's why hundreds of volunteers gathered within hours to search for him. They combed through the dense underbrush, each one hoping to be the person who would shout joyfully, "I found him! He's here!" But that moment never came. Because William hadn't wandered off, he had been taken. The first alarming sign came when a sniffer dog was brought in, and it could only trace William's scent within the boundaries of his grandmother's yard. This suggested he couldn't have wandered off on foot. If he had gone into the forest, the dog would have picked up his scent there. The family noticed that the police began to consider the possibility of other scenarios as the vegetation in the forest where the search continued grew thicker and thicker, while there were still no signs of the child. William was searched for day and night, but after 5 days there were still no leads, and the chances of finding the boy were becoming more and more elusive. Investigators finally concluded that the boy could not have disappeared on his own, which meant he had been abducted. William's disappearance soon became the largest police investigation in New South Wales. Detectives, criminal profilers, forensic analysts, and psychologists were all brought in. One forensic psychologist involved in the case suggested that the crime was likely opportunistic rather than planned. Almost no one knew the family would be in Kendall. only the grandmother and William's parents. That meant the abductor must have had another reason to be in the area. Perhaps they were visiting someone, lived nearby, or were there for work. The psychologist also noted that the window of opportunity to abduct a child from the grandmother's home, tucked away at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, was incredibly narrow. It seems this was not a premeditated crime, he said, and when someone makes an impulsive decision, they make mistakes. It's those mistakes that investigators focus on. But at first it was the police who made the mistakes. Because they initially believed William had simply wandered off, they didn't treat the area as a crime scene. They didn't secure the property. Volunteers, neighbors, and locals walked freely across the yard in an effort to help. From the perspective of the local community, that unity was admirable. But from the perspective of forensic science, it was a disaster. William's mother, grandmother, and of course his sister were quickly ruled out as suspects. But who else had been nearby shortly before he disappeared? His father had left the house before 9 a.m. to make a work call via Skype. It's certain he didn't take William with him. A photo taken at 9:37 a.m. shows the boy playing on the grandmother's veranda. So who else could have seen the child and taken him? A nanny? A teacher? A swimming coach? There have been cases where offenders posed as professionals whose jobs gave them access to children. But the police found no evidence that anyone had shown a particular interest in William. In fact, the family doubted they'd even told anyone they were going to Kendall. Detectives reviewed all available CCTV footage from the route the family took from Sydney to Kendall. They saw no indication that anyone had followed them, neither from Sydney nor after the stop at McDonald's, which the children had asked to visit. Police analyzed hundreds of security cameras and tracked hundreds of vehicle license plates. They also examined mobile phone tower data from the area around Kendall. Since the town has such a small population and nearly everyone uses a mobile phone, investigators were able to isolate local residents from any unfamiliar signals. The question was, who else was in Kendall that morning and why? From the very beginning, detectives asked the family to recall, did they see anyone mowing a lawn nearby, delivering groceries, stopping to admire the kids riding their bikes? In other words, did anything feel off? But no, everything had seemed completely ordinary. They woke up, had breakfast, and went out to the garden. William's grandmother had complained that her washing machine was broken, so her daughter had called the local repairman and left a voicemail, asking why he hadn't come back with the promised part. Wait, stop. What time did she make that call? The women weren't sure, but guessed it was around 9 a.m. And when did William disappear? About 90 minutes later. The detectives took note. Logically, William must have been abducted by someone who was on Benaroon Drive that morning. Did the washing machine repairman, Bill Speding, receive the voicemail and feel guilty about leaving an elderly woman with piles of dirty laundry? Could he have jumped in his van and driven over, arriving right at the moment William was pretending to be a tiger, roaring and running around the side of the house? And if so, what happened next? Police decided to find out. They spoke to Speding, who told them that he and his wife had coffee that morning at a cafe across from the Laurieton Public School. Afterward, they attended a school assembly. Then they each left in separate cars. Although the explanation sounded reasonable, detectives, especially lead investigator Gary Jubilin, interviewed Speding multiple times about what he did that morning. Why so much attention on Speding? There were several reasons. It takes just 18 minutes to drive from Laurieton Public School to William's grandmother's street. If Speding skipped the assembly and drove straight to her house, he could have arrived just in time to see William disappear around the back of the home. But why would he go there if the washing machine part hadn't yet arrived? Well, William's mother did leave a message, and perhaps Speding wanted to make a quick fix so the washer would function temporarily. And maybe, just maybe, he saw the little boy running around unsupervised. If that happened, he could have quickly grabbed him and put him into his van. And then what? Did Speding have an alibi for the rest of the day? He claimed that after the school event, he worked on his computer in his office. Then at 3:30 p.m., he picked up the kids from school. Police examined the computer and confirmed he had been actively working. Later, Speding remembered he'd also repaired a fridge that day for a couple in a nearby town. The police interviewed the couple. Their fridge, though relatively new, had started making a strange noise. Speding had told them it was a common issue with that model and that he would fix it for free under warranty. On September 12th, the part arrived, but the couple wasn't home. They gave Speding permission to enter their house and complete the repair. When they returned, the fridge was working normally. They didn't expect a bill, the repair had been free, but they also didn't find any note left by Speding. Police seemed to let the matter rest, until a year later when they returned with a team of forensic specialists. They disassembled the refrigerator and tested its components for Speding's fingerprints. If they found anything, the police never said. The second reason police grew increasingly interested in Bill Speding was because his former brother-in-law, Jeffrey John Hillsley, was serving a prison sentence for the sexual assault of a 10-year-old girl. Speding had once been married to Hillsley's sister, Catherine. Detectives flagged this connection, knowing that offenders of this kind often associate with one another, sharing secrets, photos, and, in some disturbing cases, even access to children. An anonymous source told investigators that Speding's divorce from Catherine had been ugly, allegedly because he was accused of being unfit to be around children. Speding strongly denied those claims, but detectives decided to take a second look at the old allegations. On April 22, 2015, Speding was arrested on charges that, as police emphasized, were unrelated to the disappearance of William Tyrrell. Around that same time, Ronald Chapman zipped up his favorite cardigan in a familiar motion and stepped out of the Kendall Social Club. For months, Ronald Chapman had been waiting for the police to knock on his door so he could finally tell them what he had seen. A little boy in a Spider-Man costume in a car on the very day William Tyrrell disappeared. They never came. But the elderly man kept his faith in the police, trusting they knew what they were doing. Maybe, he thought, they already knew who the culprit was. Eventually, Detective Richard Broomby paid him a visit. Chapman told the detective that he had seen William Tyrrell in the back seat of a speeding car, racing down his street on the morning of the boy's disappearance. But then he added a phrase, one that may have shaped how his testimony would later be perceived. He had spent a long time wondering whether his eyes had played tricks on him, whether it was real or just a moment of confusion. In the end, he decided it had been real. Still, he said to the detective, "Maybe I imagined it." That single sentence stuck with Broomby, and the police didn't return to speak with the elderly witness again for another full year. William's mother once stated that she couldn't believe the perpetrator was a local because the people in the small village were, in her words, truly lovely. "I don't think it was someone from here," she said. "I think it was someone who doesn't live here. I can't say for sure, but I can't imagine someone local, someone who knows my mom, who knows us, who knows our family, deciding to take our child. I just can't imagine it." And yet it soon became clear that not everyone living nearby was as pleasant as they seemed. In the early stages of the investigation, the police compiled a list of 600 individuals of interest. Many of them were convicted sex offenders who lived close to the area where William disappeared. The first person police interviewed was Derek Edward Nichols, a local church choir singer and organist. But Nichols was also a convicted child molester. At the time of William's disappearance, he was in his 70s. He had previously been charged with indecent acts involving a 12-year-old boy in Tasmania in 1987, and 20 years later, was convicted for possessing child exploitation material. Nichols lived within walking distance of William's grandmother's home. When officers visited his house and questioned him, he claimed he had not been in Kendall at the time of the boy's disappearance. No direct evidence linked him to the crime, so detectives moved on to the next name on their list. Paul John Bickford, from the coastal town of Port Macquarie, was another person of interest. A former taxi driver from Sydney, Bickford had moved north after retiring and started a community group called GAPA, an organization for grandparents raising their grandchildren, often because their own children were in prison or otherwise unable to provide care. In 2009, Bickford was even awarded for his contributions to society, but in 2014 he was charged with the sexual abuse of an 11-year-old girl. Members of the community were shocked. He had stepped down from his role at GAPA, citing family reasons, and only later did it emerge that he was a convicted offender. When questioned about William's case, Bickford told police that he had been having lunch with friends in Port Macquarie that day. He appeared surprised that police were interested in him. Bickford was one of those offenders who tried to justify his actions by claiming he had a specific preference and that he wasn't a danger to all children. He believed his charges did not make him a monster. Interestingly, Bickford's organization included at least one other convicted sex offender, 59-year-old Anthony Jones. A former truck driver who had served 3 years in prison for an incident involving an 11-year-old girl. On the day William disappeared, Jones was living in Washoe, just 20 minutes from Kendall. Tiffany Cherry, who had been in a 16-year relationship with Jones's daughter, Nori Gardle, told police she didn't believe Jones had taken William. She said that he had been very drunk that day. Jones was unemployed and known to collect scrap metal, which he sold to buy more alcohol. Still, police interviewed his ex-wife, not because they suspected her, but because she owned a white station wagon that resembled the one William's mother had seen parked near the house. She said Jones had occasionally used the vehicle. Detectives examined the car but found nothing to link Jones to the abduction. Despite this, he remained under intense media pressure, bombarded with questions about where he had been on September 12, 2014. Who else was on the list? One name stood out: Frank Abbott, a 78-year-old man currently serving a prison sentence for a series of sexual assaults against young boys. Abbott had a long and disturbing history with the criminal justice system. He had stood trial twice for the murder of a 17-year-old girl. Today, there are likely few people still alive who remember that horrific crime. But in 1968, Helen Mary Harrison was last seen riding her bicycle home from work on March 16th. A week later, her body was found in a shallow grave. She was missing all clothing below the waist. She had been robbed and murdered. The case remained unsolved for over 20 years, until the early 1990s, when police arrested Frank Abbott, who would have been around 20 years old at the time of Helen's death. It was reported that Abbott had confessed to the murder while speaking to a fellow inmate, though he later claimed the inmate was simply after the $5,000 reward that had been offered for information. Abbott's name resurfaced during the William Tyrrell investigation because of his history of offenses against boys committed after the Helen Harrison trial. When William disappeared in 2014, Abbott was living nearby, though his living conditions were extremely poor, almost homeless, and he had no real alibi. Detectives decided to search the area where Abbott had been staying. They brought in sniffer dogs, an excavator, and completely dismantled his makeshift home, but nothing was found. No evidence linking Frank Abbott to William's disappearance. In cases of a crime involving volunteers, everyone follows a protocol. People who want to help the police must register. There are several reasons for this, primarily safety. After all, a criminal might return to the crime scene to admire their work. The same happens in cases of child abduction. Kidnappers sometimes drive past the area cordoned off with yellow tape or past crowds of media representatives. After 3 years of searching for William, when all old and reliable police leads had come to nothing, detectives decided to revisit the list of people who helped search for William in the very first days after his disappearance. One name caught their attention: Robert Dano, a member of the Emergency Rescue Service from Tyrrell, who arrived by truck with other team members around 4 p.m. on Friday, September 12th. In 2014, he had 2 jobs: laying cables in the Terry area and working at a gas station in Lakewood, a 10-minute drive from William Tyrrell's disappearance site. Why did he attract police attention? For 2 reasons. First, he drove a small white station wagon, and William's mother told the police that one of 2 cars parked unusually close together opposite her mother's house was a small white station wagon. The 38-year-old man often parked his van at night near the tennis court or exhibition complex in Kendall between shifts at the gas station and slept in it. Second, Dano was a sexual offender. In 2011, several years before the boy's disappearance, he was accused of indecent acts involving 3 young men. They were not minors, but had cognitive impairments and did not always fully understand their actions. The police did not press charges, partly because they were unsure the victims would be able to testify in court. In 2013, Dano voluntarily provided a DNA sample, but nothing came of it. On September 12, 2014, he was still working for the Tyrrell Emergency Rescue Service, and when he saw the search for the boy underway in town, he took part and, like many other volunteers, stayed overnight in the town. When the police became interested in Dano, it turned out he was serving a prison sentence. In November 2015, he was found guilty on 5 of 13 counts, all sexual offenses against victims whose mental capacities were at the level of a 7 to 9-year-old child. He was sentenced to 5 years and 6 months in prison, with the possibility of early release after 3 years. Dano was in prison when the police obtained a warrant to search his Suzuki station wagon. It was parked in his father's garage and was not in use. According to the warrant, the police were looking for mobile phones, laptops, cameras, electronic data, papers, clothing, and any items that could be connected to William Tyrrell's disappearance. On November 13, 2018, he was questioned by the police. He listened to the questions but did not answer a single one, including the question about his name. Dano had claimed during the trial that he himself suffered from cognitive impairments. Apparently, he decided to make this his main defense strategy. 3 years had passed since the boy's disappearance, when suddenly law enforcement revealed one of the most important details about William Tyrrell's life. For 3 long years after William went missing, no one knew that the boy's parents were not actually his biological parents. He had been temporarily placed with their family while awaiting adoption. And although there was no reason to keep this a secret, the Department of Family and Community Services struggled to allow this information to become public. Moreover, a court order was needed to force the department to comply. They also lost their appeal because the court saw what the department could not. It was wrong to make the media publish inaccurate information. It was also wrong to make the police lie to the public. Pretending William lived with his biological parents while everyone who loved him knew this was not true was a mistake. It was a mistake that needed to be corrected. "I feel like the worst mother in the world," said William's biological mother for the first time. Media companies immediately began asking her for interviews. They wanted to hear her story, and she wanted to talk, but also to be paid. This was difficult for newspapers, which almost never pay for interviews, but easier for magazines and TV stations, where payment is customary. She explained her point of view. "I'm poor, and the media companies are rich. They will make money from this story, so I need to be paid too." She gave her first interview on the 7 Sunday night news program, where she was introduced as William's mother and named. Oddly enough, the media are once again forbidden to publish her surname because the case is under court review. According to New South Wales law, the identity of any member of the boy's foster or biological family cannot be revealed. To protect the privacy of William's older sister Lindsay, who still lives with the foster parents and was only 4 years old when her brother disappeared. Lindsay, by the way, is not her real name, but a pseudonym given by the court. People who had hoped for 3 years for William's safe return home saw for the first time the woman who gave him life. A petite brunette with a pretty round face. The last time she saw her son, she gave him a pair of light boots that he loved. She was young when she met William's father. The couple often fought, but they adored their children. However, both children, William and Lindsay, were taken away. "I'm coping," she says about how she deals with the long investigation. "But it's very hard." She knows about all the rumors, mostly online, that somehow she is involved in the disappearance. She has heard people whisper about her and her brother, who supposedly has some connection to the town of Kendall. The woman vehemently denies any involvement in the child's abduction. Detective Jubilin also confirmed that suspicions regarding both the foster and biological parents were dismissed immediately, and they are not suspects. The investigators did everything possible and examined numerous leads, but Detective Jubilin wanted more. He wanted something that no one in New South Wales had ever obtained before. He wanted to offer a reward of $1 million for information about the boy, and he succeeded. The reward offer was announced on the 2nd anniversary of the boy's disappearance. Detective Jubilin firmly believed that the boy might still be alive and that the $1 million reward would help solve the case. The money might come between 2 accomplices or between a married couple, where, for example, the woman might be protecting her husband because he threatened her and their children. Paul Savage was born in August 1944, so at the time of William's disappearance, he was 70 years old. He lived then, and still lives, diagonally across the road from William's grandmother's house. He and his wife Heather had been married for 4 decades and had 3 children, all grown up with families of their own. Like many retirees, he enjoyed taking regular walks, which he did on the morning the boy disappeared. Afterwards, he returned home and saw his wife off to her car as she went to play bingo with friends. Around 11 a.m., a neighbor knocked on his door to inform him that a local child was missing. Together with other village residents, he joined the search for the boy. In January 2019, Detective Jubilin was removed from the case after a colleague complained that Jubilin had recorded a conversation with Savage on his mobile phone without first obtaining a warrant. It was also reported that Savage found and removed a hidden camera placed under a bush near his home, but didn't attempt to find out who it belonged to, as he was convinced it was police property. Furthermore, police planted a Spider-Man costume in a spot where Savage, on his walk, was sure to see it. They then hid in the bushes to watch how he would react to the discovery. It is completely unclear why this elderly man attracted so much attention from the investigators, but he was questioned at least 6 times. When asked why, he replied, "At first they went after Bill Speding, then me, but I have nothing to do with it, and the one real culprit is still at large." Savage has no criminal record related to children or any other offenses. His adult children are furious about the numerous interrogations their father has undergone. Perhaps the police are unsettled because some of his statements differ in minor details, but Savage says he has always cooperated with the police. Maybe he should have told them no. The coroner's hearing began on March 25, 2019. A list of witnesses was presented, including some familiar names: Mr. Anthony Jones, Mr. Robert Dano, and Mr. Bill Speding. Paul Savage's name was also on the list. However, Gary Jubilin was absent, as he had been replaced by the new lead investigator on the case, David Laidlaw. During the proceedings, it was revealed that Speding was preparing to file a lawsuit for damages caused by the investigation, claiming he lost his home, business, and reputation. He spent 6 hours in an interrogation room shortly after William's disappearance, questioned about the case. After being arrested on old charges, he was searched and forced to spend 8 weeks in jail awaiting trial, only for all charges to be dropped. On the last day of the second round of hearings in August 2019, Ronald Chapman was called to testify. Observers watched with interest as the man took the oath. Who was this pleasant-looking man in a cardigan who calmly sat down, folding his hands over his stomach? Mr. Chapman told the court that he lived in Kendall, just 1.6 kilometers from the site where William Tyrrell was abducted. When asked what he was doing the morning the boy disappeared, he said he was waiting for a flower delivery he had ordered. When he thought he heard the sound of a mailbox closing, he went outside just in time to see a car speeding around the corner, with William Tyrrell in the back seat. Not a boy who looked like William Tyrrell. Not a boy who could have been William Tyrrell. William Tyrrell himself. The man was absolutely certain of his words. His tone did not suggest he was trying to convince anyone. He saw 3-year-old William sitting unrestrained in the car, with his hands on the window and his face between his hands, looking out. This was a shocking admission for the families, especially when it emerged that it took police over 1,000 days to formally take the statement from possibly the most important witness in the case. Mr. Chapman described the driver as a woman who could have been nearly 30 or even close to 40, but no older. From what he could recall, she was quite tall and heavy-set. Mr. Chapman tried to describe this detail of the woman's appearance as gently as possible. He then explained how the car ran over gravel. The man admitted he was upset that the woman was driving at such a high speed while a boy sat unbuckled in the back seat. But that was far from all the witness revealed. He said that a second car followed the first one, also speeding around the corner. The car was blue, possibly a Ford with a 6-cylinder engine. A man was driving the second car. It had tinted windows, and unlike the woman and boy in the first car, Mr. Chapman could not see his face. When he turned the corner, the 2 right side wheels literally lifted off the ground, he said. Mr. Chapman recalled that at the time it seemed to him that the cars were traveling together, although he had no real reason to think so, except for the careless driving style of both drivers. At that moment, he didn't yet know a child had gone missing, so he went back inside and started reading the newspaper. But that evening, the news reported that a boy had disappeared. Just a boy. The public was not yet informed about the Spider-Man costume. Still, the man put 2 and 2 together. When asked why he didn't immediately report this to the police, Chapman tried to explain that the police had promised to knock on every door in the area, questioning people who might have seen something. But no one came to him, perhaps because he lived 1.6 kilometers away from where the child disappeared. Coroner Harriet Graham leaned forward to ask the witness, "Are you sure the driver of the car was a woman?" Mr. Chapman looked at her and calmly said, "Yes." When asked about the age of the boy, he replied, "I would say 3 to 4 years old. He was standing. He wasn't crying. He was in a Spider-Man costume." "But was the witness absolutely certain it was William Tyrrell?" the coroner asked again. "That was him," he said confidently. "Yes." During the coroner's investigation, many interesting details about William Tyrrell's disappearance came to light, some of which caused a bombshell effect. It remains unclear whether the police will be able to piece all these facts together into a coherent version of events. However, Ali Chumley, a local writer and investigator, has outlined a fairly plausible scenario that incorporates many of the facts revealed during the inquest. Chumley, a teacher who lived next door to one of the persons of interest in the investigation and gained access to confidential police materials, concluded that William was abducted by 3 people. She writes that William may have been taken by a trio: the driver, the abductor, and a lookout accomplice, with the latter possibly hiding in an empty neighboring house whose occupants were away at the time. Chumley presented a photograph of an agricultural machinery shed located 2 kilometers from William's grandmother's house, where the child might have been hidden after the abduction. From there, William was possibly taken to a nearby mountain road about 300 kilometers from the crime scene, a fact supported by a surprising deathbed confession that only emerged during the coroner's investigation. Chumley talks not only about the abductor, but also about other people who gave testimony and who definitely know more than they have revealed. She believes several individuals were involved in the crime, and all of them testified at the inquest. Interestingly, 2 men whom the police most suspected, Bill Speding and Paul Savage, according to Chumley, have no connection to the case at all. Both men, by the way, have already been removed from the list of persons of interest. William's foster mother recalls a man she saw that morning driving a car past her mother's house. She described him as a large man, around 60 years old, with reddish hair and a thick neck. Chumley writes that this description fits several local residents, but only one of them is a known child molester. Frank Abbott was once a large, red-haired man. During the coroner's investigation, it was revealed that Abbott repeatedly told neighbors and other locals that he knew where William was. Abbott allegedly confessed to children how he disposed of the remains. A woman who worked as a nanny for 2 boys in 2018 reported that the younger boy, Jeffrey, told her that William was killed by Abbott. Supposedly, he and his brother saw a suitcase where William might have been, but they were warned that if they told anyone, their mother would be harmed. The problem with this confession is that Abbott was known for boasting and making threats related to some murder. 2 other people recalled that Abbott bragged about getting away with the murder of Helen Marie Harrison many years ago and threatened their families if they tried to talk about it. But the most shocking testimony during the coroner's investigation was the deathbed confession of a man named Ray Porter. He told a nurse caring for him that he picked up his best friend with a pleasant little boy near a shed in Kendall and drove them about 300 kilometers. The nurse said he often spoke about 2 friends named Phil and Frank. What else was revealed at the inquest? Firstly, it became known that in 2016, Abbott told a local man, Danny Parrish, that he knew where William's remains were. Parrish confirmed Abbott said, "I know where William Tyrrell is. Why don't you check Jeff Owen's house?" Jeffrey Owen, like Frank Abbott and Bill Speding, was a local handyman. On September 8, 2014, William's grandmother contacted Owen to repair the flooring on her veranda. Abbott, who was free at the time, lived in Owen's caravan home in Herons Creek, north of Kendall. Secondly, the inquest revealed that Abbott often hinted that the police were looking for William in the wrong place and said he could smell a dead body near Logan's Crossing, about 10 minutes drive from William's grandmother's house. Last August, the police searched a timber unloading site at the sawmill in Herons Creek in the hilly area near Logan's Crossing, but no information about what they found was released. While giving testimony, Owen distanced himself from Abbott and said Abbott's workmanship as a handyman did not meet his standards. Owen said he might have been at the town's social center on the day William disappeared, September 12th, but he was unsure because he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and his memory was failing. Little William Tyrrell lived with loving people for only 3 years, but has been missing for twice as long. People who have heard about the case often say, "Oh, he's been gone so long, he's probably already dead." But in reality, there is no proof of that. No trace of William, no shoe, no hair has ever been found, and so we must believe that he is alive and needs to come home. He does not belong to those holding him captive. He should be with those who loved him. But even if that is not the case, and William's life was taken from him, he still needs to be found so that his biological and foster families can say goodbye.